Namaskar and welcome to In Focus. With the functioning of Parliament at the forefront of the news, today we ask the question, is our Parliament working the way it's expected to? And with me is a gentleman who's studied Parliament for 25 years, observed and analysed it, and now is in fact a member of the Rajya Sabha, author and columnist Arun Shaurie. Arun, you've spent almost 25 years observing and studying Parliament. Now you're a member of the Rajya Sabha. Has it lived up to your expectations?
Well, at times it has been a critical factor in saving us. When I remember Rajiv Gandhi acquired 2/3 of the House, a majority, still the 1/3 was able to stem a great force. It has been able from time to time to force accountability and answers. But as a general body for deliberation on national issues, it has become less and less productive.
And is that because of the manner in which it conducts itself, or is it because of the people who get elected to it, or is it simply that somehow it's lost its identity and become too merged with the executive and it's forgotten its legislative function?
I think all these factors, but mainly the second factor, the type of persons who come to Parliament or get elected to Parliament, that is a problem. I mean, in a home, I don't think that in our families we've ever heard anybody shout, ever. I don't think that in a court anybody raising his voice would be allowed 2 seconds by the judge. But here it has become the custom for grown-up persons to shout, scream, tear up papers, as we have seen on the Women's Bill, march into the well of the House. That's a peculiar culture.
Explain something to me. You've emphasized that, in a sense, the dominant impression of Parliament is this image that they quarrel, they fight, that MPs are adversaries, even enemies. Is it, in fact, then a very unfriendly place?
No, on the contrary. Personally, I have been not overwhelmed, but completely surprised at the extraordinary, not just friendliness, but affection with which a person like me, a complete outsider, has been welcomed by individuals, by the House itself, by the attention with which they were kind enough to hear me for 45 minutes.
And are MPs as affectionate and chummy with each other?
Yes, indeed. They'd be shouting and screaming, and they just walk out, and in the lobby they're all joking.
So the image we have from the outside of a place where people do nothing but quarrel and shout, yes, is actually in a strange way contradicted by the image you have from the inside, where they're actually very affectionate and familiar and friendly.
Right, and not just image, but the reality. So I think that it is the shouting which is a put on, not the friendliness.
That's the truth of the position. They're really friendly people.
Yes, and they are not that enraged, as comes out. For instance, in a question hour, somebody will read today, somebody was reading a news item, something about Godse's brother doing something or being allowed to do it. Now, it was, everybody became very agitated. And all that happened was, even when Mr. Krishnakant said, I have not read the item, when you give it to me in writing, when I read it, I will give you my ruling. No, we must have it just now. Then Mr. Advani got up and said, well, I thought, sir, that by your saying that you will look into the matter, members would have been satisfied. If they want, in addition, for me to say that I will also look into the matter, I will certainly do so. And everybody just sat down, and the question number 481 came up. So what do I mean was, if I were that enraged, how could I suddenly subside with just one sentence?
This is interesting. You're saying that part of this rage is actually professional rancor. It's actually an image and an act.
Yes, you know, these we have in some parts of the country these persons who go professional mourners.
Huh. So as they say in Punjabi, tondore pheran wale.
It seems a bit like that. But the same persons in 1 second will be stepping outside and...
But there's also something else you said. Properly handled by a skillful person, then this rancor can be controlled in seconds.
Yes, I think there is a contrast. There have been contrasts between various speakers. There have been contrasts between vice presidents. And one of the best things that I noticed this time round, my first time in seeing Parliament from inside, was the sternness with which Mr. Krishnakant conducts the proceedings. I have seen him reprimand ministers. I would have, if I had been reprimanded like that, I would have been very hesitant to sit or continue sitting at that time in the chamber, or come back to the chamber next day to do my normal functions. I would be so ashamed.
So that the audience understand, you're saying that in fact Mr. Krishnakant, in his capacity of chairman of the Rajya Sabha, actually reprimanded a minister. But why? What did the minister do wrong?
Well, a question was asked. The minister read out a reply, 2 paragraphs. A supplementary question which was a different question was asked. He again more or less repeated the contents of the paragraph.
So he was ill-informed?
Mr. Krishnakant said so. Then he said that the minister had not done his homework. A third time it occurred, Mr. Krishnakant said that I am not going to allow further questions or answers on this topic, so as to allow the minister time to do his homework. I am going to schedule a half-an-hour discussion later on. Now, that is very salutary. I think all of us, members, everybody in every institution should be under a stern eye.
This is an embarrassing rebuke for any minister to take. Was it by any chance the Minister of Steel and Mines, Naveen Patnaik?
Well, in that case it happened to be. Tomorrow it could be somebody else. But the point was not the minister as much as the, I think, the very good sternness of the presiding officer.
Let me pick up something that's inherent in what you said up to now. We look upon Parliament essentially for the quality of debate that it should generate. That's the essence of Parliament. This is where the country's future is discussed. Are ministers, are MPs actually doing that? Is Parliament living up to this major expectation?
It differs from minister to minister and naturally from member to member also. There are some ministers who strike one, or some members who immediately, the moment they have to say 3 sentences and you know the person is so well prepared. Many have acquired that reputation.
How many are in the opposite category, that they can speak for minutes, perhaps half an hour, and you're crystal clear and obvious that they don't know what they're talking about?
Or that they are repeating the obvious, or urging the desirable, or saying what a great problem poverty is. I think
how often does that happen?
I think that happens quite often in the course of a debate. I found them less factually oriented than they might be.
Is this because MPs are not prepared, because they won't do their homework?
No, it has become, I mean, that kind of a speech has become the custom. As, if I may say so, that some of the writing of some persons in our newspapers, that is customary. They only describe the great problem and sorrow, and they only urge the truth, or, you know, we should all become good. But on the specific point of how the court delays may be changed, they have less
Except
to say.
that when journalists play to the gallery, it can be forgiven because journalists are only important in their own estimation. When MPs play to the gallery and waste the valuable time of Parliament, it's somehow a greater loss to the nation.
It's not a question. Actually, this kind of speech and discourse does not play to a gallery. It has just become customary. Maybe that's the level of understanding or application on particular subjects.
Tell me something, is it just that it's customary, or is it in fact in a sense something a little more worrying? Is it the case that some MPs stand up to speak because they want to be seen, heard, recognized, reported in the press and TV, and not because they have an actual point or argument to make?
I'm sure it's a combination of both things. And but it's not just that some MPs want to be noticed, but that the only way of getting noticed is to speak up. And unfortunately, the only way to get noticed by the press is to speak up loudly. So the press has a lot to do with this, I think.
What about something else?
And therefore, probably a different type, many types of activities should be devised, committee work and other work, so that members feel fulfilled and they don't just have to wait and get frustrated by not getting a turn to speak.
You're saying that if adequate opportunities are given to fulfill them, to give them a chance to express themselves, then they won't want to do it in this rather fraudulent and wasteful way.
Well, I didn't use the word fraudulent and wasteful, but certainly they would have alternate things to do. For instance, here the only way really is to speak to the whole House. That need not be the only way, for many of these persons are persons of great eminence. I mean, Dr. Raja Ramanna, he's a very distinguished scientist, but he's a soft-spoken, quiet man. He would probably never get a chance to speak
in the full house.
In the full house, in the normal course.
So someone like him needs select committees, smaller groups where he can air himself more fully.
And in fact, I would think that when an issue involving science and technology, like these nuclear explosions, comes up, then actually we should, ordinary members should be lectured to by experts like him.
So that,
just lectured to, a seminar.
So that on such special debates, it's the Ramannas of Parliament that should speak rather than the ordinary MP. But on other occasions, when perhaps the MP is of a more shy and retiring nature, you need to create special forums, select committees so that they can express themselves.
Yes, and those committees are there. But supposing you covered those committees through television, you covered them more through the press, as in the United States, then the members would not feel that I have to only get up and shout and scream and get some time so that
You're saying something very important there, aren't you, Arun? You're actually saying that you need to give the MP the feeling that what he's saying and doing in Parliament is getting coverage, because at the end of the day, he has a constituency that he needs to be speaking to and who must be seeing him as doing a job. So the televising, the reporting is important.
And what you televise? If everybody is just televising the dharna by 5 persons by focusing only on those 5 as is being done to show that there's a big crowd.
But you're saying very importantly that it's, just as you're saying it's important for MPs to accept that not everyone can speak in a full house, some will speak in select committees and smaller forums, you're also equally saying that those smaller forums and select committees should be televised, should be given their fair share of press attention.
Right, and also I would feel that a large number of issues which are now taken up in the House should be shifted to those committees.
So that the work can be done more efficiently and effectively?
Yes, for instance, we have this new Indian device called the 0 hour. After the question hour, people just raise the issue of the moment which is agitating them at that time.
The worst halla galla happens at that point.
Right. So why not set up a 0 hour committee?
So that you can do your shouting out of the full house.
Yes, and if there is a matter of that great urgency, let it be attended to by one cabinet minister. He will report to the others, and you just have 20 persons there rather than 250 or in the Lok Sabha 540 persons being held hostage by the headline of the moment.
Okay, I accept that, and I think it's a very clever innovation. But what would you say to critics who say the idea is okay, but it looks like the cheap option? Everyone wants the full house as his podium and forum. You're offering a large number, a smaller committee as their answer.
Because it's just not possible for 540 persons to get a chance, a fair chance, even if you sat 24 hours a day for 365
But then how do you choose who's the MP who gets the full house to speak in and who's the poor chap who goes to the select committee?
By the issue.
By the issue.
For instance, if it's the headline of today, something about Godse, it took up 5 minutes. Godse's brother has written a play.
So the headline can be for the full house?
No, headline should be for that 0 hour committee.
Okay.
So that here, similarly, if I have an issue that relates to, let's say, railways in one district in Odisha, the line has not been extended. I really should be raising it in the consultative committee or standing committee of railways.
And would you be
I should be debarred from the House from raising it.
And would you be equally conscious in saying that there are some things that ministers want to say which should not be said in the full house but should be said to a select committee? Or would they be accepted?
I don't know about which of, yes, I'm sure there would be ministers of all kinds who would be happy to focus on smaller groups because more meaningful interaction is possible. But you see, when you take up a very specialized issue, as I mentioned to you, a member was declaiming, I'm sure very correctly, about the neglect of railway lines in Orissa. Now 240 persons, 50 persons are not that exercised about that very real problem.
If you do it in the full house, you'll bore them to death. If you do it in a select committee, it's more effective and it's more pertinent.
And something will get done.
Okay, Arun, let's take a break there. I think I want to come back in part 2 and talk about the other aspect of Parliament that also militates against debate. You've made it quite clear that one reason why debating can't happen is because MPs misuse the forum because they have their own problems in mind. I want to now discuss with you the extent to which party discipline, the party system, militates against debate. But first, Let's take a quick commercial break. We'll be back in just a couple of moments. Don't go away. Welcome back to In Focus. We're talking to Arun Shaurie about the critical question, how well is our parliament functioning? Arun, in part one we talked about the way MPs prepare themselves and the way in which they seek forums, and sometimes this benefits parliament, sometimes it doesn't. Let me now come to a different question. Do you find that the quality of debate in parliament is genuine and that ideas are genuinely raised? Or do you find that in fact people simply take up and reinforce party positions and that it stops as a sort of impasse?
Yes, actually, the first point is, I'm very happily surprised at how serious the members are. Even in wanting attention or a forum, they are very serious. Many of them, to ask a question, do a lot of work. To prepare a supplementary, I see them really making, a thorough, preparing themselves thoroughly for it.
So the debate is genuine?
Many times.
But what happens on the other times?
It seems just going through the motions. As in any forum, working for 8 or 10 hours a day, for 5 days a week. But so this does not conflict with the other observation that you were suggesting about parties. People can be deadly serious and yet bonded to parties.
But do you find that the attitude of party leaders and perhaps party whips is a greater concern with the numbers that march through the division lobby rather than a concern with the quality of debate on the floor of the House?
One thing, that no, they are as concerned with the debate. For instance, in the few days that I have been there has been no voting. There's a general discussion on the Ministry of External Affairs one day, on the Ministry of Human Resources Development, on environment in the afternoon, and no votes are taken. So at that time, the concern of the controller or of the person scheduling the speakers will be, let me give a good defense of our position. At the same time, let me give a chance to everybody. So it's really a human management problem.
I suppose what I'm really asking is, are MPs treated by their parties as representatives in the classic Edmund Burke sense, or are they sometimes thought of as delegates?
When it comes to a vote, they are just treated as persons who have to vote. That number of persons have to vote in a particular way decided upon by the party. Now, in the party, to come to that decision, there might have been a lot of democratic discussion. In some more, in some less.
But during the actual debate on the floor?
They will take fixed positions. For instance, if it's a vote of confidence, if it's a vote on the women's reservation bill. And I certainly feel that that ought to be changed. In general, I mean, this has nothing to do with my being in
You're saying that
Parliament for
MPs should
10
be
days.
Encouraged by their parties to
And
actually
by the
express
press.
their real feelings and opinions?
Yes, on almost every matter, except when it is a vote of confidence. Actually, the more
because that's a special case of vote of confidence.
Yes.
It affects
Of course.
the actual survival of the government.
Right, but of course, if the ideal position would be that even on that, precisely because it is a special matter, everybody should
Vote his
into-
conscience rather than party whips.
Right, but that's not practical. But barring that, and I would also even suggest that in India we should reduce the number of occasions by which a government can fall, or the events by which a government can fall. A budget.
Okay, I accept that. Let me pick up on what you said. You said, barring a vote of confidence, MPs should have the ability and the freedom to voice their thoughts on the floor of the Parliament. What is it then that restrains them? Is it that they are scared to express an opinion different to that of the party, or is it that party whips mistake this as dissent?
Well, actually, the fomenter of that opinion is the press and other persons in other parties. For instance, supposing there is a budget, the finance minister has a proposal for dealing with stock brokers, and I have a better idea, and I say, look here, sir, in the full house I say, sir, in this proposal of yours, these 3 difficulties might arise. Wouldn't you like to consider such and such thing? And tomorrow the papers are going to say, BJP MP, pounds on the FM, revolt in party. Then the MP will be inhibited, and the party will also make sure that such independent opinions are not expressed.
You're saying that the press represents a suggestion as if it is a revolt, thus inhibiting MPs from
Yes.
even making helpful suggestions that
Indeed.
amend what their own side is saying.
Indeed.
So you're saying that actually there's a big onus of responsibility on the press to help MPs and to help the parliamentary system debate matters more effectively and more openly.
Right. By seeing is Mr. Karan Thapa's suggestion is just Mr. Karan Thapa's suggestion on that particular point.
It's when what you're really saying, I suppose, and I'm not meaning to interrupt you, is that it's the motivations the press adds to statements made by individuals on the floor of the House that make it difficult for those members then to intervene, to make their suggestions.
And for the parties then it becomes a greater inducement to make sure that everybody stays in line. Second thing I think that needs to be changed is this 10th schedule in our constitution. It is this anti-defection law. Because there, disobedience of a whip on any matter is ground for expulsion.
And this again inhibits expression of free, open opinion.
Right. And that will certainly be the case. Some leaders are more confident, they value independent opinion, and they then go on. They say,
so you're saying that if the press rethinks the way it represents debates, and if the 10th schedule can be amended, whatever limitations there are to debates on the floor of the House will disappear.
Will become more, you'd have a wider space.
Okay, let me then come back to the issue you touched on right at the beginning of this interview in part 1, when you said that one of the most shocking things was to realize we don't shout at home, we don't shout in courts, but people spend all their time in Parliament shouting.
Not all.
A lot of their time.
Well,
how does one get out of that? Is it the culture that needs to be changed? Because you talked in a sense about how there's professional rancor that they cultivate, or is it the quality of person, the type of person that needs to be amended?
Well, firstly, the quality of person. That's a longer term solution, we'll come to that. But the immediate thing, for instance, it is a very good rule of several preceding speakers and presiding officers, when people shout, nothing shall go on record.
So that it inhibits them from the word go.
That is, yes, useless. But supposing that rule were also adopted tomorrow by the press,
then there'll be no encouragement whatsoever.
Exactly. And on the contrary, what we do now is, I was sitting in Parliament day before yesterday, 3 days ago. This postal strike had just begun. 2 members raised it. They raised their voice about it. It went on for maybe 45 seconds. Mr. Krishnakant allowed it. Mr. Bajpayee was sitting there. Then Mr. Bajpayee got up and said, well, we have been talking to the employees, to the postal workers. They were not in the mood for a settlement, but talks are going on at this time. I assure this House that a solution will be found soon. Kept quiet. And next day's heading says, it did not last more than 45 seconds, the whole sequence.
The papers made it seem as if it was a major disruption of
Parliament. Yes, postal strike rocks Rajya Sabha.
Okay, those are very clearly short-term measures that will help. Because time is against us, quickly, what's the long-term measure? How do we, in the long term, ensure that people who deserve to be MPs and can give to the country through debate become MPs, not people who, in a sense, look and behave like delinquents?
But firstly, no MP should be able to become a minister. Ministers should be from outside. Then this is not a stepping ladder to anything else. Secondly, we must prescribe qualifications for legislators. This was one of the
educational or moral?
All kinds. This was one of the unfinished tasks of the Constituent Assembly, and the President at that time said this is one of the gravest bits that gives him sadness.
Is there a third point?
The third point is that it really is that 5-party leaders of 5 parties, 6 parties have to come to an agreement among themselves. We will field a better time. So often in the last 30 years that I've observed Parliament, there have been moments when any lamppost which was put up by Mrs. Gandhi or by Janata Party got elected. They could have put up better persons at that critical moment.
Arun, my last point. Now that you're part of the institution, can you bring pressure to ensure that these 3 points are actually enforced and that a goal that you and the country as a whole shares is actually achieved?
I can't bring any pressure. You cannot change an ocean with a toothpick. But I will certainly try.
But will you remain as critical of Parliament as you used to be before you joined it? Will you be as outspoken as you were in the past, even though now you're part of it?
I certainly think so. There's no restraining that.
Arun Shaurie, thank you very much for speaking so openly to In Focus.
Thanks for coming.
That's it for this week. We'll be back next week with another interviewee. But for today, from Mr. Arun Shaurie's residence in New Delhi, goodbye.